Picture this. You're in the middle of the biggest deal of your career. Your phone buzzes with a text message, and suddenly your entire world comes crashing down. That's exactly what happened to me on a Tuesday morning in March when the CEO's son decided to fire me via text while I was literally shaking hands on a $28 million contract. But here's the thing about karma. It has a way of coming full circle when you least expect it. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. I rolled out of bed in my cramped studio apartment in downtown Phoenix, the same routine that had become my lifeline since landing my job at Meridian Tech Solutions. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I scrolled through my emails, already seeing the familiar flood of messages that would define another 12-hour workday. My name is Jessica Rodriguez, and back then, I was a senior account executive at what seemed like a promising tech company. Meridian specialized in enterprise software solutions, the kind of complex systems that Fortune 500 companies desperately needed but rarely understood. I'd been there since the beginning, employee number 7, watching the company grow from a handful of dreamers in a garage to a legitimate player in the competitive world of business technology. The company was founded by Marcus Thornfield, a brilliant engineer who'd made his fortune developing security protocols for government contractors. Marcus was the kind of CEO who remembered everyone's birthday, who'd stay late to help debug a particularly stubborn piece of code, and who genuinely believed that success meant lifting everyone up together. Under his leadership, Meridian had grown to over 200 employees and was pulling in steady revenue of around $15 million annually. But Marcus had one significant blind spot: his son, Derek. Derek Thornfield was 28 years old and possessed every negative stereotype you could imagine about nepotism in corporate America. Fresh out of an expensive MBA program that his father had paid for, Derek waltzed into Meridian as Vice President of Strategic Operations, a title that sounded important but essentially meant he could interfere with any department he chose. Where Marcus was thoughtful and collaborative, Derek was impulsive and authoritarian. Where Marcus built relationships, Derek burned bridges. The problem was that Marcus loved his son unconditionally and refused to see the growing resentment among the staff. Derek had a talent for presenting himself as innovative and forward-thinking during board meetings, while simultaneously undermining the very people who made the company successful. He'd swoop into ongoing projects, demand unnecessary changes, and then disappear when things got complicated, leaving the rest of us to clean up the mess. I'd managed to stay under Derek's radar for most of my tenure at Meridian, focusing on what I did best: building relationships with clients and closing deals. My track record spoke for itself. I'd brought in over $40 million in contracts during my time there, consistently exceeding my quotas and earning the respect of both my colleagues and our clients. I wasn't the flashiest salesperson in the company, but I was reliable, thorough, and genuinely cared about solving our customers' problems. That's what made the Phoenix Manufacturing Group opportunity so special. Phoenix Manufacturing was a massive industrial conglomerate with operations across the southwestern United States. They produced everything from automotive components to aerospace parts, employing over 15,000 people across 12 facilities. Their current software infrastructure was a patchwork of outdated systems that barely communicated with each other, resulting in inefficiencies that were costing them millions annually. I'd first connected with Sarah Chen, Phoenix Manufacturing's Chief Technology Officer, at a trade conference in Las Vegas 8 months earlier. We'd struck up a conversation over terrible convention center coffee, and I'd learned about the massive technology overhaul they were planning. Sarah was brilliant, methodical, and refreshingly honest about the challenges her company faced. More importantly, she was looking for a technology partner who could understand their complex needs and deliver solutions that would actually work in the real world. The opportunity was enormous: a complete enterprise software implementation that would touch every aspect of their operations. The initial contract value was estimated at $28 million, spread over 3 years, with the potential for additional phases that could double that amount. It was the kind of deal that could transform Meridian from a mid-sized player into a major force in the industry. But landing Phoenix Manufacturing wasn't going to be easy. They were evaluating proposals from 5 different companies, including two major competitors with significantly more resources than Meridian. Our advantage lay in our agility and our ability to customize solutions for specific client needs. Exactly the kind of personalized service that larger companies struggled to provide. I spent months developing the relationship with Sarah and her team. We conducted detailed assessments of their current systems, analyzed their workflow processes, and designed a comprehensive implementation plan that addressed their unique challenges. I flew to their facilities in Tucson, Albuquerque, and El Paso, meeting with department heads and understanding how our software would impact their daily operation. The technical proposal alone took 6 weeks to develop, requiring coordination between our engineering team, our project management specialists, and our customer support division. We weren't just selling software, we were proposing a complete transformation of how Phoenix Manufacturing operates. Every detail mattered, from the initial data migration to the final user training programs. Derek, of course, had opinions about the Phoenix deal. He'd insert himself into client meetings, often contradicting information I'd already provided, or suggesting changes that demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what Phoenix Manufacturing actually needed. During one particularly painful conference call, Derek spent 20 minutes explaining why Phoenix should consider a completely different software architecture, one that would have been completely inappropriate for their manufacturing environment. I watched Sarah's expression grow increasingly skeptical as Derek pontificated about disruptive innovation and paradigm shift. After that call, I had to spend 2 hours on the phone with Sarah, carefully walking back Derek's suggestions and refocusing the conversation on the practical solutions Phoenix actually needed. It was exhausting, having to manage both the client relationship and Derek's interference simultaneously. The situation came to a head 3 weeks before the final proposal deadline. Derek decided that our pricing strategy was too conservative and demanded that we increase our bid by 30%. His reasoning was that a higher price would make our proposal seem more premium and valuable. I tried to explain that Phoenix Manufacturing had already given us clear budget parameters and that pricing ourselves out of consideration would be disastrous. "You're thinking too small, Jessica," Derek said during a heated meeting in his corner office. "Companies like Phoenix Manufacturing expect to pay premium prices for premium solutions. If we lowball this, they'll assume our software is inferior." "Derek, I've been working with their team for 8 months," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "They've been transparent about their budget constraints, and they're making this decision based on value, not just price. If we come in 30% higher than expected, we'll lose the deal entirely." "That's where you're wrong," Derek insisted, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "I've been studying their financial reports and they have plenty of money to spend. They're just testing us to see if we'll stand behind our product." The conversation went in circles for an hour, with Derek becoming increasingly condescending and dismissive of my experience with the client. Finally, he pulled rank, declaring that as vice president he had the authority to set pricing strategy. The proposal would go out with his inflated numbers, regardless of my objections. I left that meeting feeling defeated and frustrated. 8 months of careful relationship building were about to be undermined by Derek's ego and his fundamental mental misunderstanding of our clients' needs. I considered going to Marcus directly, but Derek had made it clear that questioning his decisions would be viewed as insubordination. That night, I called Sarah Chen. "Sarah, I need to give you a heads up about something," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Our formal proposal is going to come in higher than the numbers we discussed during our initial conversations." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "How much higher, Jessica?" "About 30% above what we originally estimated." Another pause, longer this time. "That's disappointing. I thought we had a mutual understanding about budget parameters." "We do," I said quickly, "and I want you to know that I'm working on alternative approaches that might help bridge the gap. Can we schedule a call for tomorrow to discuss some potential solutions?" Sarah agreed, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. The trust we'd built over 8 months was beginning to erode, and I wasn't sure how to repair it without directly contradicting my own company's pricing strategy. The next morning, Derek sent out the official proposal with his inflated pricing. Within 2 hours, Sarah called me back. "Jessica, I have to be honest with you," she said. This pricing puts Meridian completely out of consideration for this project. We've received proposals from 4 other companies, and yours is significantly higher than any of them, not by a small margin, but by millions of dollars. My heart sank. Sarah, let me see what I can do. There might be ways to restructure the proposal, or adjust the implementation timeline to bring the costs down. I appreciate that, but at this point, the decision makers here are questioning whether Meridian understands our needs at all. The pricing suggests that you're either not taking this project seriously, or that you fundamentally misunderstand our requirements. After that call, I knew I had to take action. I spent the weekend developing an alternative proposal, one that maintained Derek's basic structure but included creative financing options, phased implementation schedule, and value-added services that could justify a higher price point while still keeping the total cost within Phoenix Manufacturing's budget. I also reached out to our engineering team to explore technical modifications that could reduce implementation complexity without sacrificing functionality. Our lead developer, Michael Torres, was incredibly helpful, identifying several areas where we could streamline the software architecture to reduce both costs and deployment time. By Monday morning, I had a comprehensive alternative proposal that addressed Derek's pricing concerns, while keeping Phoenix Manufacturing within their budget parameters. The solution was elegant. We would implement the software in 3 distinct phases, with each phase generating immediate cost savings that Phoenix could use to fund the subsequent phases. It was essentially a self-financing implementation that would deliver value from day one. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I scheduled a meeting with Derek to present the alternative approach. He listened for about 5 minutes before cutting me off. "Jessica, I thought I made myself clear about the pricing strategy," he said, not bothering to look up from his computer. "This alternative proposal undermines the entire value proposition we're trying to establish." "But Derek, this approach gives Phoenix exactly what they need while maintaining our profit margins," I explained. "We're not reducing our revenue, we're just restructuring how it's delivered." "That's not the point," Derek snapped. "The point is that I made a strategic decision about pricing, and you're trying to circumvent that decision. Either you support the company's strategy, or you don't belong here." The threat was clear, but I couldn't let 8 months of work disappear because of Derek's stubbornness. "What if I present both proposals to Phoenix and let them choose which approach works better for their situation?" Derek's face darkened. "Absolutely not. We present one unified proposal, not a menu of options that makes us look indecisive and unprofessional." That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Sarah Chen and asked if she'd be willing to meet with me in person to discuss alternative approaches to the Phoenix Manufacturing project. I didn't tell Derek about the meeting, and I didn't tell him that I was going to present the alternative proposal I'd developed. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Phoenix Manufacturing's headquarters in Phoenix. It would be a crucial conversation, possibly the last chance to salvage a deal that could transform both companies. I spent the weekend refining my presentation, preparing for every possible question and objection. Tuesday morning arrived with clear skies and the promise of a day that would either vindicate 8 months of hard work or mark the end of my career at Meridian Tech Solutions. I had no idea that by the end of that day, both of those things would turn out to be true. I arrived at Phoenix Manufacturing's headquarters at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before my scheduled meeting with Sarah Chen. The building was an impressive glass and steel structure that screamed success and efficiency, exactly the kind of company that could afford a $28 million technology upgrade. I sat in my rental car for a few minutes, reviewing my notes one final time, and trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. The alternative proposal I'd prepared was comprehensive and creative. Instead of Derek's straightforward but overpriced approach, I'd developed a 3-phase implementation strategy that would allow Phoenix Manufacturing to see immediate returns on their investment. Phase 1 would focus on their most critical pain points, the manufacturing floor systems that were causing daily bottlenecks and costly delays. Phase 2 would integrate their supply chain management, and Phase 3 would complete the transformation with advanced analytics and reporting capabilities. The beauty of this approach was that each phase would generate cost savings that Phoenix could reinvest in the subsequent phases. By the time we completed Phase 3, the software would have essentially paid for itself through improved efficiency and reduced operational costs. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Marcus Thornfield had always encouraged at Meridian, even if his son couldn't appreciate. Sarah greeted me in the lobby with a warm smile, though I could detect underlying tension in her demeanor. We'd built a strong professional relationship over the past 8 months, but Derek's pricing debacle had clearly damaged her confidence in Meridian's ability to deliver on our promise. She led me through a maze of corridors to a conference room, where 3 other Phoenix manufacturing executives were waiting. "Jessica, I'd like you to meet Robert Kim, our Chief Financial Officer, and Linda Martinez, our Vice President of Operations," Sarah said as we entered the room. "And you already know David Thompson from our IT department." I shook hands with each of them, noting the polite but guarded expressions on their faces. These were experienced business leaders who'd been burned by overpromising vendors before. They were giving me one last chance to prove that Meridian could deliver value, not just expensive promises. "Thank you all for making time for this meeting," I began, setting up my laptop and connecting to the room's presentation system. "I know our formal proposal came in higher than expected, and I want to address those concerns directly while showing you an alternative approach that might better serve Phoenix Manufacturing's needs." Robert Kim leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Jessica, I have to be honest with you. When we saw your pricing, we were shocked. We've been very transparent about our budget parameters from the beginning, and frankly we're questioning whether Meridian is the right partner for this project." I nodded, acknowledging his concern. "I completely understand your reaction, Rob. The pricing in our formal proposal doesn't reflect the collaborative approach we've been developing throughout this process. That's why I wanted to meet with you today, to present an alternative that addresses both your budgetary constraints and your operational needs." For the next 45 minutes, I walked them through my 3-phase implementation strategy. I showed them detailed timelines, cost projections, and most importantly, the return on investment they could expect from each phase. I explained how the immediate efficiency gains from Phase 1 would generate enough savings to partially fund Phase 2, creating a self-sustaining implementation cycle. Linda Martinez was the first to show genuine interest. "This phased approach makes a lot of sense from an operational standpoint," she said, studying the charts on the screen. "We could see immediate improvements in our manufacturing processes without having to completely overhaul everything at once." David Thompson nodded in agreement. "The technical architecture is sound, and the gradual rollout would give us time to train our staff properly. We've had bad experiences with vendors who try to implement everything simultaneously." Robert Kim was taking notes, running quick calculations on his tablet. "The financial model is interesting," he admitted. "If the Phase 1 savings projections are accurate, this approach could actually reduce our total cost of ownership over the 3-year period." Sarah looked around the table at her colleagues, then back at me. "Jessica, this is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we were hoping to see from Meridian. Why wasn't this approach included in your formal proposal?" I chose my words carefully. This alternative represents some additional analysis our team conducted after submitting the formal proposal. We wanted to explore every possible way to deliver maximum value while respecting your budget parameters. The truth was more complicated, of course. I couldn't tell them that I'd developed this approach in direct contradiction to Derek's pricing strategy, or that I was essentially going behind my own company's back to salvage the deal. That would have raised questions about Meridian's internal decision-making processes and potentially damaged our credibility even further. Robert Kim closed his tablet and looked directly at me. "Jessica, assuming we can verify these savings projections, this alternative approach addresses our primary concerns about the project. What kind of timeline are we looking at for implementation?" "Phase 1 could begin within 60 days of contract signing," I replied. "We'd need approximately 4 months to complete the manufacturing floor integration, at which point you should start seeing measurable efficiency improvements. Phase 2 would begin during month 6, and Phase 3 would commence in month 12. Linda Martinez smiled for the first time during the meeting. That timeline aligns perfectly with our operational planning cycles. We could integrate the software rollout with our existing maintenance schedules and training programs. The momentum in the room was shifting. I could see the executives exchanging glances, the kind of nonverbal communication that happens when a group of experienced professionals recognize a good opportunity. After 8 months of relationship building, I was finally seeing the breakthrough I'd been working toward. Sarah Chen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Phoenix manufacturing facility below. Jessica, I want to be completely transparent with you. Based on your formal proposal, we were prepared to move forward with Tech Global Solutions. Their pricing was significantly lower, and their implementation timeline was more aggressive. My heart sank. Tech Global was our biggest competitor, a massive company with deep pockets and a track record of undercutting smaller firms to win contracts. If Phoenix Manufacturing was already leaning toward Tech Global, my alternative proposal might be too little, too late. However, Sarah continued, turning back to face the group, this alternative approach you've presented today changes the equation entirely. Tech Global's solution is essentially an off-the-shelf implementation with minimal customization. What you're proposing is a truly tailored solution that addresses our specific operational challenges. David Thompson nodded enthusiastic. Tech Global's software is powerful, but it's designed for generic manufacturing environments. We'd spend months trying to adapt our processes to their system instead of having the system adapt to our needs. Robert Kim was back to his calculations. The financial comparison is interesting too. Tech Global's upfront costs are lower, but their total cost of ownership over 5 years is actually higher when you factor in customization fees, training costs, and ongoing support. Linda Martinez picked up the thread, and their implementation timeline is aggressive to the point of being unrealistic. They're promising to have everything online in 6 months, which would require shutting down production lines for extended periods. That's not feasible for our operation. I felt a surge of excitement, but tried to maintain my professional composure. Our phased approach is specifically designed to minimize operational disruption. Each implementation phase would be carefully coordinated with your production schedules to ensure continuous operation. Sarah returned to her seat and looked around the table at her colleagues. I think we need to have a serious conversation about moving forward with Meridian. This alternative proposal addresses every concern we've raised, and Jessica's demonstrated a level of commitment to our success that we haven't seen from other vendors. Robert Kim nodded slowly. I agree. Jessica, assuming we can work out the final contractual details, I think we're ready to move forward with your 3-phase approach. The words hit me like a lightning bolt. After 8 months of hard work, countless meetings, and Derek's attempts to sabotage the deal, Phoenix Manufacturing was ready to commit to a $28 million contract with Meridian Tech Solutions. That's incredible news, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm confident that Meridian can deliver exactly what Phoenix Manufacturing needs to transform your operation. You've demonstrated that Meridian understands our business and is committed to our success. That's exactly the kind of partnership we're looking for. David Thompson leaned forward. When can we start the contracting process? We'd like to have Phase 1 implementation beginning by the end of the quarter. I can have our legal team prepare the contracts within the next 2 weeks, I replied. We'll need to coordinate with your procurement department to ensure all the compliance requirements are met. Linda Martinez stood up and extended her hand. Jessica, congratulations. This is going to be a great partnership for both companies. As I shook hands with each of the Phoenix Manufacturing executives, I felt a mixture of elation and relief. 8 months of relationship building had finally paid off. The alternative proposal I'd developed in direct contradiction to Derek's pricing strategy had not only saved the deal but had positioned Meridian as the preferred vendor for one of the largest contracts in company history. The meeting concluded with detailed discussions about next steps, timeline coordination, and communication protocols. Sarah walked me back to the lobby, and we spent a few minutes discussing the implementation planning process. Jessica, I want you to know that this deal is happening because of your commitment to understanding our needs. Sarah said as we reached the lobby, Meridian is lucky to have someone like you representing the company. I thanked her, and promised to send a formal confirmation of our discussion by the end of the day. As I walked back to my rental car, I pulled out my phone to call Marcus Thornfield with the incredible news. $28 million in new business would be the largest single contract in Meridian's history, and I couldn't wait to share the success with our team. But as I unlocked my car door, my phone buzzed with a text message notification. The sender was Derek Thornfield, and the message was only 2 lines long. Jessica, your insubordination regarding the Phoenix manufacturing proposal is unacceptable. You're fired. Clean out your desk by the end of business today. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Derek had fired me via text message at the exact moment I was securing the biggest deal in company history. The irony was almost too absurd to believe. My phone immediately rang. It was Marcus Thornfield calling, probably wondering why his son had just terminated one of the company's top performers without consultation. I answered on the second ring. Marcus, I have some incredible news about the Phoenix manufacturing deal, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the shock of Derek's message. Jessica, before you say anything else, I need to understand what just happened. Derek just informed me that he's terminated your employment effective immediately. He claims you violated company policy by going around his pricing decisions. I took a deep breath. Marcus, I'm sitting in the parking lot of Phoenix Manufacturing headquarters. I just finished a meeting where they committed to a $28 million contract with Meridian. Derek fired me via text message while I was literally securing the biggest deal in company history. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. I could practically hear Marcus processing the absurdity of the situation. His son had just fired the employee who had secured the largest contract in company history, and he'd done it via text message without any consultation or investigation. Jessica, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened today, Marcus said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. And I mean everything, from the moment you woke up until Derek sent that text. I sat in my rental car in the Phoenix manufacturing parking lot, watching employees walk past on their lunch breaks, living their normal lives while mine had just been turned upside down. I told Marcus everything: the meeting with Sarah Chen and her team, the presentation of my alternative 3-phase proposal, the enthusiastic response from Phoenix Manufacturing's executives, and their commitment to move forward with the $28 million contract. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Marcus said when I finished. Phoenix Manufacturing was ready to walk away from Meridian because of Derek's pricing strategy. But your alternative proposal not only saved the deal but secured their commitment to the largest contract in our company's history. That's exactly right, Marcus. They were literally prepared to sign with Tech Global Solutions until I presented the phased implementation approach. Robert Kim, their CFO, said the financial model was superior to any other vendor proposal they'd received. Another long pause. Jessica, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did Derek know about this meeting with Phoenix Manufacturing? I hesitated, knowing that my answer would likely determine how this entire situation played out. No, Mark. Derek specifically forbade me from presenting alternative proposals. He said we would only present one unified proposal, and that questioning his pricing strategy was insubordination. So you went to this meeting knowing that Derek had explicitly told you not to pursue alternative approach? Yes, I admitted. But Marcus, I couldn't watch 8 months of relationship building disappear because of a pricing strategy that Phoenix Manufacturing had clearly told us was unacceptable. I had to try to salvage the deal. Marcus was quiet for almost a full minute. I could hear papers shuffling in the background and what sounded like him pacing around his office. Jessica, I'm going to call you back in 30 minutes. Don't go anywhere and don't talk to anyone about this situation until you hear from me. The line went dead, leaving me alone with my thoughts in a parking lot 2,000 miles from home. I'd just experienced the highest professional high of my career, followed immediately by the lowest professional low. In the span of 2 hours, I'd secured a deal that could transform Meridian Tech Solutions and been fired via text message by the CEO's son. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from my colleague Amy Patterson in the sales department. Jess, what the hell is going on? Derek just sent an email to the entire sales team saying you've been terminated for insubordination. People are freaking out. Then another message from Michael Torres in engineering. Jessica, heard about Derek's announcement. This is insane. Everyone knows you're one of the best account executives we have. What really happened? Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with calls and messages from Meridian employees expressing shock, confusion, and support. The news of my termination was spreading through the company like wildfire, and apparently, nobody could understand why Derek would fire one of the top performers. I turned off my phone and sat in silence, trying to process everything that had happened. The Phoenix manufacturing deal was real. I had their verbal commitment and a clear path forward for implementation, but I was no longer employed by Meridian Tech Solutions, which meant I wouldn't be around to see the project through to completion. The irony was devastating. I'd spent 8 months building relationships, developing solutions, and navigating Derek's interference to land the biggest deal in company history. Now Derek's impulsiveness had cost him the very employee who had delivered that success. It was like firing the quarterback who just threw the winning touchdown pass. My phone rang again. It was Marcus calling back exactly 30 minutes after our previous conversation. Jessica, I've spent the last half hour reviewing your personnel file, your sales performance, and the documentation around the Phoenix manufacturing proposal. Marcus said without preamble. I've also had a very frank conversation with Derek about his decision to terminate your employment. What did he say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Derek maintains that you violated company policy by circumventing his pricing decisions and going directly to the client without authorization. He claims that your actions undermined his authority and could have damaged Meridian's reputation if Phoenix Manufacturing had compared your alternative proposal to our formal submission. I felt my temper rise. The offer was unexpected and generous, but it also felt like a compromise that avoided addressing the real problem. Marcus, what about Derek? If he was willing to fire me for securing this deal, how is he going to react when you bring me back as a consultant? Derek won't be involved in the Phoenix manufacturing project, Marcus said firmly. I'm reassigning that account to direct CEO oversight, which means you'll report directly to me throughout the implementation process. It was a creative solution that would allow me to see the Phoenix deal through to completion, while giving Marcus a way to work around Derek's poor decision. But it also meant that Derek would face no real consequences for firing the company's top performer on the day she delivered their biggest success. Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I need to think about it, I said. This isn't just about the Phoenix manufacturing deal. It's about the fact that Derek can make impulsive decisions that damage the company and face no accountability for those choices. I understand your frustration, Jessica, but Derek is learning how to be an executive, and sometimes that process involves making mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Marcus. This was Derek putting his ego ahead of the company's interests. And if that behavior continues, it's going to cost Meridian a lot more than just one employee. We agreed that I would consider the consulting offer and give Marcus an answer within 24 hours. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the Phoenix manufacturing deal had exposed a fundamental flaw in Meridian's leadership structure. Marcus's refusal to hold Derek accountable for destructive decisions would eventually undermine everything he'd built. I started my rental car and began the drive back to the airport, my mind racing with possibility. The consulting offer would allow me to complete the Phoenix project and earn a substantial bonus, but it would also mean working for a company where nepotism trumped performance. On the other hand, walking away from the deal would mean abandoning 8 months of relationship building and potentially damaging Phoenix Manufacturing's confidence in any technology vendor. As I merged onto the freeway, my phone rang again. This time it was Sarah Chen from Phoenix Manufacturing. Jessica, I wanted to follow up on our meeting today, Sarah said. We're ready to move forward with the contracting process. When can we schedule a meeting with your legal team to finalize the details? I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would be crucial. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about Meridian's current situation. There have been some internal changes that might affect how we proceed with the project. What kind of changes? Sarah asked, her voice immediately becoming more cautious. The executive who was overseeing the Phoenix manufacturing proposal has made some personnel decisions that could impact our implementation timeline. I want to be completely transparent with you about the situation before we move forward. There was a long pause. Jessica, are you telling me that Meridian is having internal problems that could affect our project? I'm telling you that Meridian's leadership is working through some strategic differences about how to manage large-scale implementation. I want to make sure Phoenix Manufacturing has all the information you need to make the best decision for your company. Sarah's voice became more serious. Jessica, I need you to be direct with me. Is Meridian still capable of delivering on the proposal you presented today? Absolutely, I said without hesitation. The technical capabilities, the implementation plan, and the support infrastructure are all in place. The question is whether Meridian's current leadership structure will allow for the kind of collaborative partnership that Phoenix Manufacturing deserves. I think we need to have another conversation, Sarah said. Can you come back to Phoenix tomorrow morning? I'd like you to meet with our entire executive team and explain exactly what's happening at Meridian. I agreed to the meeting, knowing that it would force me to make some difficult decisions about my future. As I continued driving toward the airport, I began to formulate a plan that would protect Phoenix Manufacturing's interests, while also holding Derek Thornfield accountable for his destructive leadership. The Phoenix Manufacturing deal had become about more than just a $28 million contract. It had become a test of whether good work and client relationships could survive bad management decisions. And I was determined to make sure that Phoenix Manufacturing got the technology solution they deserved, regardless of Derek's attempts to sabotage the process. By the time I reached the airport, I had made my decision. I would return to Phoenix the next morning, but not as a Meridian employee or consultant. I would return as someone who was prepared to put the client's interests ahead of company politics, even if it meant taking some significant professional risk. The real confrontation with Derek Thornfield was still to come, and I had a feeling it was going to be more explosive than anyone anticipated. The flight back to Phoenix the next morning gave me time to prepare for what might be the most important meeting of my career. I'd spent most of the previous evening in my hotel room, crafting a presentation that would explain Meridian's internal situation to Phoenix Manufacturing's executive team without completely destroying the business relationship I'd worked 8 months to build. The challenge was finding the right balance between transparency and professionalism. Phoenix Manufacturing deserved to know that their potential technology partner was experiencing leadership conflicts that could affect project delivery. But I couldn't simply throw Derek and Meridian under the bus without looking petty and unprofessional myself. I arrived at Phoenix Manufacturing's headquarters 30 minutes early, using the extra time to review my notes and mentally rehearse the difficult conversation ahead. Sarah Chen met me in the lobby, but her demeanor was noticeably different from the previous day. Where she'd been warm and congratulatory after our successful meeting, now she seemed cautious and concerned. Jessica, I have to admit that your call yesterday raised some serious questions for our leadership team, Sarah said as we walked toward the elevator. We've invested significant time and energy in this evaluation process, and the idea that our preferred vendor might be experiencing internal instability is concerning. I completely understand your concerns, Sarah. That's why I wanted to address them directly with your entire team rather than trying to manage the situation through phone calls and emails. The elevator doors opened to reveal we weren't alone for the ride to the executive floor. 2 Phoenix Manufacturing employees were already inside, and their presence meant we couldn't continue our conversation about Meridian's internal problems. Sarah and I made small talk about the weather and Phoenix's recent economic development initiatives, but I could feel the tension beneath the surface. When we reached the executive conference room, I was surprised to find not just the 4 executives from the previous day, but also 2 additional people I hadn't met before. Sarah made the introductions as we took our seats around the polished mahogany table. Jessica, I'd like you to meet Jennifer Walsh, our Chief Executive Officer, and Thomas Bradley, our General Counsel, Sarah said. Given the sensitive nature of today's discussion, Jennifer felt it was important to have legal representation present. The presence of Phoenix Manufacturing's CEO and lawyer transformed the meeting from a follow-up discussion into something much more formal and consequential. Jennifer Walsh was an imposing woman in her early 50s with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that made it clear she didn't tolerate nonsense from vendors or employees. Thomas Bradley looked like every corporate lawyer I'd ever met, expensive suit, careful expression, and a legal pad already filled with notes. Jessica, Sarah has briefed us on yesterday's productive meeting, but she's also shared some concerns about Meridian's internal stability. Jennifer Walsh began without preamble. Before Phoenix Manufacturing commits to a $28 million technology partnership, we need to understand exactly what we're getting into. I opened my laptop and connected to the conference room's presentation system, displaying a simple slide with 3 bullet points: current situation, impact assessment, and recommended path forward. Thank you for making time for this discussion, Jennifer. I want to be completely transparent about Meridian's current situation, because Phoenix Manufacturing deserves to make an informed decision about this partnership. I clicked to the next slide, which outlined the basic facts without editorial commentary. Yesterday, approximately 2 hours after our successful meeting, I received a text message from Derek Thornfield, Meridian's Vice President of Strategic Operations, informing me that my employment had been terminated effective immediately. This termination occurred while I was literally sitting in your parking lot, having just secured your commitment to move forward with our proposal. Thomas Bradley looked up from his legal pad. What was the stated reason for your termination? Derek claimed that I had violated company policy by presenting an alternative proposal that circumvented his pricing decisions. He characterized my meeting with you as insubordination and unauthorized client contact. Robert Kim leaned forward, his expression incredulous. You were fired for securing a $28 million contract. That's correct. Derek had previously rejected the 3-phase implementation approach I presented to you yesterday. When I asked for permission to present multiple options to Phoenix Manufacturing, he explicitly forbade it and told me that questioning his decisions meant I didn't belong at Meridian. Jennifer Walsh exchanged glances with her legal counsel. Jessica, help me understand something. If Derek Thornfield rejected your alternative proposal, how did you end up presenting it to us anyway? This was the crucial moment where I had to be honest about my decision to go around Derek's authority without making myself look insubordinate or unreliable. Jennifer, Phoenix Manufacturing had already indicated that Meridian's formal proposal was outside your budget parameters, and that you were prepared to move forward with Tech Global Solutions. I had to make a choice between following Derek's directive and watching 8 months of relationship building disappear, or finding a way to present a solution that actually met your needs. So you chose to violate your company's internal protocols in order to save the deal? Thomas Bradley asked, making notes as he spoke. I chose to put Phoenix Manufacturing's interests ahead of internal politics. The 3-phase approach I presented yesterday wasn't just a pricing adjustment, it was a fundamental reimagining of how to deliver maximum value while respecting your operational constraints. Linda Martinez spoke up from across the table. Jessica, from our perspective, your alternative proposal was exactly what we needed. It addressed every concern we'd raised about timeline, budget, and operational disruption. We wouldn't be having this conversation today if you'd followed Derek's original pricing strategy. Sarah Chen nodded in agreement. The question is whether Meridian as an organization can deliver on the promises you made yesterday given the current leadership conflict. I clicked to my next slide, which outlined Marcus Thornfield's consulting offer and the proposed project management structure. Marcus Thornfield, Meridian's CEO, has offered to bring me back as an independent consultant to manage the Phoenix Manufacturing. The project would report directly to him rather than through Derek, which would eliminate the interference issues that led to yesterday's termination. Jennifer Walsh studied the slide carefully. What's your assessment of that arrangement? Jessica, can it work? This was where I had to be brutally honest, even if it meant potentially losing the deal. Jennifer, the consulting arrangement addresses the immediate problem of getting the Phoenix project implemented successfully. Marcus Thornfield is an excellent CEO with strong technical expertise and a genuine commitment to client success. Under his direct oversight, I'm confident that Meridian can deliver everything we've promised. But, Thomas Bradley prompted, clearly sensing there was more to my assessment. But, it doesn't address the underlying leadership problem that created this situation. Derek Thornfield made an impulsive decision that could have cost Meridian its largest contract ever, and he's facing no meaningful consequences for that choice. If that pattern continues, it will eventually undermine everything Marcus has built. The room was quiet for several minutes as the Phoenix manufacturing executives processed this information. I could see them weighing the risks and benefits of moving forward with a vendor that was clearly experiencing internal turmoil. Robert Kim broke the silence. Jessica, assuming we move forward with Meridian, what assurances can you give us that this kind of leadership conflict won't disrupt our implementation? Under the proposed consulting arrangement, Derek would have no involvement in the Phoenix manufacturing. Marcus would provide direct oversight, and I would have full authority to manage the client relationship and coordinate with Meridian's technical teams. The project would be insulated from the broader organizational issues. David Thompson leaned back in his chair. The technical capabilities are definitely there. I've worked with Meridian's engineering team throughout the evaluation process, and they're excellent. The question is whether the business relationship can remain stable throughout a 3-year implementation. Jennifer Walsh looked around the table at her colleagues, then back at me. Jessica, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. If you were in our position, would you move forward with Meridian given everything you've just told us? I took a deep breath, knowing that my answer would determine not just the fate of the Phoenix manufacturing deal, but potentially the future of both companies. Jennifer, if I were in your position, I would ask for additional contractual protections to ensure project continuity regardless of any future personnel changes at Meridian. I would also require regular progress reviews with Marcus Thornfield personally to ensure that leadership conflicts don't impact implementation quality. What kind of contractual protections? Thomas Bradley asked, his legal instincts clearly engaged. Performance guarantees tied to specific milestones, penalty clauses for missed deadlines caused by vendor-side personnel issues, and most importantly, a clause that gives Phoenix Manufacturing the right to bring in alternative implementation partners if Meridian fails to deliver due to internal organizational problems. Sarah Chin smiled slightly. You're essentially asking us to protect ourselves against the company you represent. I'm asking you to protect yourselves against the leadership problems that could affect any technology vendor. The difference is that I'm being transparent about Meridian's current challenges instead of pretending they don't exist. Jennifer Walsh stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Phoenix manufacturing facility. This is an unusual situation. We have a vendor representative who's essentially negotiating against her own company's interests to ensure our project succeeds. I'm negotiating in favor of successful project delivery, I corrected. If Meridian can deliver on our promises under the right contractual framework, everyone wins. If the organizational issues prevent successful delivery, Phoenix Manufacturing needs legal recourse. Thomas Bradley was taking extensive notes. These additional contractual protections would essentially create a project-specific agreement that supersedes normal vendor relationships. It's doable, but it would require significant legal review. Robert Kim looked at his colleague. The financial model still works with the additional legal complexity. The 3-phase approach Jessica presented yesterday addresses our budget constraints regardless of the contractual framework. Linda Martinez nodded. From an operational standpoint, this is still the best implementation plan we've seen. The phased rollout minimizes disruption, and the customization level is exactly what we need. David Thompson agreed. The technical architecture is sound, and Meridian's engineering team has the expertise to deliver. The organizational issues are concerning, but they're not insurmountable if we structure the contract properly. Jennifer Walsh returned to her seat and looked directly at me. Jessica, here's what we're prepared to do. Phoenix Manufacturing will move forward with Meridian under the consulting arrangement you've described, but with the additional contractual protections you've outlined. We'll require Marcus Thornfield's personal guarantee of project delivery and quarterly progress reviews with our executive team. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but I tried to maintain my professional composure. That sounds like a reasonable framework for ensuring project success. However, Jennifer continued, we have one additional requirement. We want you to be our primary point of contact throughout the entire implementation process. If Meridian tries to replace you with someone else, we reserve the right to terminate the contract. This was unexpected and potentially problematic. Jennifer, I appreciate your confidence, but that requirement could create complications with Meridian's internal processes. Jessica, you've demonstrated integrity, expertise, and a genuine commitment to our success. We're not just buying software from Meridian, we're buying a partnership with you personally. If that partnership isn't available, we're not interested in the deal. Thomas Bradley looked up from his note. We'll structure the contract so that Jessica's continued involvement is a material term of the agreement. If Meridian terminates her consulting arrangement or assigns the project to someone else, without Phoenix Manufacturing's written consent, we can void the contract without penalty. The implications of this requirement were staggering. Phoenix Manufacturing was essentially making me indispensable to the largest deal in Meridian's history. Derek couldn't fire me again without destroying the entire contract, and Marcus would have to maintain our consulting arrangement, regardless of any future family pressures. I think that arrangement protects everyone's interests, I said carefully. Phoenix Manufacturing gets continuity and accountability, and Meridian gets the security of a long-term implementation partnership. Jennifer Walsh stood up and extended her hand. Jessica, we have a deal. Thomas will coordinate with Meridian's legal team to draft the contracts, and we'll plan to have everything signed within 2 weeks. As I shook hands with each of the Phoenix Manufacturing executives, I realized that the meeting had accomplished something much more significant than just saving a business deal. It had created a framework that would force Meridian to confront its leadership problems, while ensuring that Phoenix Manufacturing's interests remained protected throughout the implementation process. The drive back to the airport gave me time to process what had just happened. In less than 48 hours, I'd gone from being Meridian's top performer to being fired via text message, to becoming an indispensable consultant on their largest contract ever. Derek's impulsive decision had inadvertently created a situation where I now had more job security and decision-making authority than I'd ever possessed as a regular employee, but the real test was still ahead. I had to call Marcus Thornfield and explain that Phoenix Manufacturing would only move forward with the deal if I remained as the primary consultant, and that the contract would include penalty clauses specifically designed to prevent the kind of leadership interference that had created this entire situation. The conversation with Marcus was going to be interesting, but I was confident that the business logic would prevail. $28 million in revenue was too important to sacrifice for Derek's ego, and the contractual framework Phoenix Manufacturing had requested would actually protect Meridian from future leadership mistakes. As my plane took off from Phoenix, I looked down at the sprawling industrial complex that would soon become Meridian's largest client. The view reminded me that sometimes the most important business decisions happen not in boardrooms or conference calls, but in moments of crisis, when people have to choose between personal politics and professional integrity. I'd made my choice, and surprisingly, it had led to the best possible outcome for everyone involved. Well, everyone except Derek Thornfield, who was about to learn that actions have consequences, even when your father owns the company. The call to Marcus Thornfield was scheduled for 4 p.m. Pacific time, giving me just enough time to return to my hotel and prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most consequential conversation of my professional career. I ordered room service and spread my notes across the desk, reviewing every detail of Phoenix Manufacturing's requirements and the contractual framework their legal team had outlined. The situation was unprecedented in my experience. A client had essentially held a vendor hostage to ensure that a specific consultant remained on their project. Phoenix Manufacturing wasn't just buying software from Meridian, they were buying a guarantee that I would personally oversee every aspect of their implementation. It was both flattering and terrifying. At exactly 4 p.m. my phone rang. Marcus's voice sounded strained, which wasn't surprising given the chaos that Derek's termination decision had created within the company. Jessica, I've been fielding calls all day from employees asking about your termination, Marcus began without pleasantries. The entire sales team is in an uproar, and our engineering department is threatening to submit a formal complaint to HR about Derek's management style. This was news to me. I'd received supportive messages from colleagues, but I hadn't realized that my termination had triggered a broader revolt against Derek's leadership. Marcus, I'm sorry that this situation has created additional problems for the company. That was never my intention. I know that, Jessica. The problem is, that Derek's decision has exposed some underlying tensions that I've been trying to manage for months. Several department heads have come to me privately expressing concerns about his judgment and leadership approach. I could hear the frustration in Marcus's voice. As a father, he wanted to support his son's career development. As a CEO, he was watching Derek's poor decisions undermine the company culture he'd spent years building. It was an impossible position that was about to become even more complicated. Marcus, I have an update on the Phoenix manufacturing situation that we need to discuss, I said, knowing that my next words would fundamentally change the dynamics between Derek, Marcus, and myself. Please tell me they're still willing to move forward with the contract, Marcus said, and I could hear the anxiety in his voice. They are, but with some specific requirements that you need to understand before we proceed. I took a deep breath and began explaining Phoenix Manufacturing's contractual demands, the performance guarantees, the penalty clauses, Marcus's personal involvement, and most importantly, their insistence that I remain as the primary consultant throughout the implementation. There was a long silence when I finished. I could practically hear Marcus processing the implications of what Phoenix Manufacturing had demanded. So essentially, Phoenix Manufacturing is saying they'll only do business with Meridian if you're personally involved in the project, Marcus asked finally. That's correct. Jennifer Walsh was very clear that they view this as a partnership with me personally, not just with Meridian as a company. If I'm removed from the project for any reason, they have the right to terminate the contract without penalty. Another pause. Jessica, do you understand what this means? Derek can't touch you without destroying our largest contract ever. He's essentially been neutralized on the most important deal in company history. I understand the implications, Marcus. The question is whether you're comfortable with that arrangement, both as a CEO and as Derek's father. Marcus was quiet for almost 2 minutes. I could hear him moving around his office, probably pacing as he worked through the ramifications of Phoenix Manufacturing's demand. Jessica, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Part of me is relieved that Phoenix Manufacturing has created a framework that prevents Derek from interfering with this project. His decision to fire you was impulsive and destructive, and frankly, I've been struggling with how to address it without creating a family crisis. This was more candor than I'd expected from Marcus, but it confirmed what I'd suspected. Derek's poor judgment was creating problems that extended far beyond my termination. The consulting arrangement gives us a way to move forward that protects both the Phoenix deal and your relationship with Derek, I said carefully. I'll have the authority to manage the client relationship and coordinate implementation without Derek's interference. But it also means that Derek learns nothing from this experience, Marcus replied, his voice heavy with frustration. He made a catastrophic decision and ended up with no consequences because you found a way to work around his mistake. I hadn't considered this perspective, but Marcus was right. The consulting arrangement essentially allowed Derek to escape accountability for his poor judgment while ensuring that the Phoenix deal proceeded successfully. It was a solution that worked for everyone except the principle of holding executives responsible for their decisions. Marcus, what if we structured the consulting arrangement differently? I suggested, an idea forming as we spoke. What if Phoenix Manufacturing's contractual requirements become a catalyst for broader changes in Meridian's leadership structure? Phoenix Manufacturing is requiring quarterly progress reviews with you personally, performance guarantees tied to specific milestones, and penalty clauses for vendor-side organizational problems. What if you applied similar accountability measures to Derek's other project? Marcus was quiet, but I could sense his interest. You're suggesting that Phoenix Manufacturing's contract becomes a template for how Meridian manages all major client relationships. Derek's decision to fire me created a crisis that forced Phoenix Manufacturing to demand higher standards of accountability and client service. Why not implement those same standards across the entire company? The conversation continued for another 30 minutes as we explored the possibility. Marcus was clearly intrigued by the idea of using Phoenix Manufacturing's requirements as a framework for improving Meridian's overall client management approach. It would create accountability measures that would prevent the kind of destructive leadership decisions that had nearly cost them their largest contract. Jessica, I want to discuss this further, but first I need to have a conversation with Derek about the Phoenix situation, Marcus said as our call began to wind down. He needs to understand the consequences of his decision and how it's affected not just you but the entire company. How do you think he'll react when you tell him about Phoenix Manufacturing's requirements? I asked. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Honestly, I think Derek is about to learn some very expensive lessons about leadership and accountability. The fact that his impulsive decision created a situation where he's been completely removed from our most important client relationship should be a wake-up call. We agreed to schedule a three-way call with Phoenix Manufacturing's legal team the following day to finalize the consulting agreement and begin the contract drafting process. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the events of the past few days had fundamentally altered the trajectory of my career and potentially changed Meridian's entire approach to client management. That evening, I received a call from Amy Patterson, my former colleague in Meridian's sales department. "Jessica, you need to know what happened in the office today," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "What do you mean?" "Derek called an all-hands meeting this afternoon to explain your termination and defend his decision. It was a complete disaster. People were asking pointed questions about why he fired the person who just landed our biggest contract ever." Michael Torres from engineering stood up and asked Derek to explain how firing top performers was supposed to improve company morale. This was getting interesting. How did Derek respond? He got defensive and started talking about insubordination and chain of command. Then, Robert from accounting asked if Derek was planning to fire anyone else who exceeded their sales targets. The whole room started laughing, and Derek stormed out of the meeting. I could picture the scene, Derek trying to justify his decision to a room full of employees who knew exactly how valuable I'd been to the company. His attempt to control the narrative had clearly backfired spectacularly. But here's the best part, Amy continued. "After Derek left, Marcus came into the meeting and told everyone that you'd been offered a consulting position to manage the Phoenix Manufacturing implementation. He said the client had specifically requested you and that the project would proceed under your leadership." How did people react to that? Standing ovation, Jessica. Literally everyone in the room stood up and applauded. It was like Marcus was announcing that sanity had been restored to the company. The image of my former colleagues applauding my return even as a consultant was deeply moving. It confirmed that Derek's leadership style had created widespread resentment and that my termination had been viewed as symptomatic of larger problems within the company. 2 days later, I was back in Meridian's offices for the first time since Derek's text message termination. The consulting agreement had been finalized, the contracts with Phoenix Manufacturing were being drafted, and I was officially the project manager for the largest deal in company history. Walking through the Meridian offices felt surreal. Employees who had been my colleagues just a week earlier were now treating me like a returning hero. The reception was warm and enthusiastic, but there was also an undercurrent of curiosity about how the consulting arrangement would work in practice. Marcus had scheduled a meeting to discuss the project management structure and introduce me to the expanded team that would support the Phoenix Manufacturing implementation. As I walked toward the conference room, I passed Derek's office and saw him through the glass walls, hunched over his computer with the expression of barely controlled anger. The meeting was productive and energized. Marcus had assembled a cross-functional team that included representatives from engineering, project management, customer support, and quality assurance. The group was enthusiastic about the Phoenix project and eager to work under a leadership structure that prioritized client success over internal politics. "Jessica will have full authority over all client-facing decisions," Marcus explained to the team. "Any questions or concerns about the Phoenix implementation should be directed to her, and all project communications will go through her approval." Michael Torres raised his hand. "What about Derek's involvement in the project? Is he still overseeing strategic operations for major accounts?" Marcus's expression became serious. "Derek will not be involved in the Phoenix Manufacturing implementation. This project reports directly to me, and Jessica has complete autonomy to manage the client relationship as she sees fit." The relief in the room was palpable. Several team members exchanged glances that clearly communicated their satisfaction with this arrangement. Derek's interference in previous projects had created frustration and inefficiency that everyone was eager to avoid. After the meeting, Marcus asked me to stay behind for a private conversation. Jessica, I want you to know that the Phoenix situation has forced me to confront some difficult truths about Derek's leadership approach, he said once the conference room had cleared. What kind of truth? The fact that our entire team is relieved to work on a project without Derek's involvement tells me everything I need to know about his management style. I've been making excuses for his behavior because he's my son, but I can't ignore the impact it's having on company morale and client relationships. Marcus looked older than I remembered, as if the stress of managing the family business dynamic was taking a visible toll. I'm implementing new accountability measures for all executive positions, including Derek's. The standards that Phoenix Manufacturing demanded for their project will become standard operating procedures for every major client relationship. How is Derek responding to these changes? Marcus smiled grimly. Derek is learning that actions have consequences. Even when your father owns the company, he's been reassigned to strategic planning and analysis, which will give him time to develop better judgment before he's given authority over client relationships again. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Derek entered without waiting for permission, his face flushed with anger and frustration. "Dad, I need to talk to you about this Phoenix Manufacturing situation," Derek said, completely ignoring my presence. "Having Jessica manage our largest client as an outside consultant makes the company look weak and disorganized." Marcus's expression hardened. "Derek, Jessica is here as our invited consultant, and she's the reason we still have the Phoenix Manufacturing contract. If you have concerns about the arrangement, we can discuss them privately. I have concerns about undermining the authority structure of this company," Derek shot back. "When employees can circumvent executive decisions and face no consequences, it destroys organizational discipline." I decided to speak up. "Derek, the only reason I'm here as a consultant is because you fired me via text message for securing a $28 million contract. Phoenix Manufacturing's requirements aren't undermining Meridian's authority structure. They're protecting their interests against the kind of impulsive decision-making that nearly cost them their technology partner." Derek's face turned red. "You deliberately violated company policy by going around my pricing decisions. That's insubordination, regardless of the outcome, and you fired your top performer on the biggest day in company history without investigation, consultation, or consideration of the consequences." I replied calmly. "That's poor leadership, regardless of your title." Marcus stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation happening in front of him. "Both of you need to step back. Derek, Jessica's consulting arrangement is a done deal, and the Phoenix project will proceed under her management. Jessica, Derek is still an executive at this company, and he deserves professional respect." The tension in the room was thick, but Derek seemed to realize he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. The Phoenix Manufacturing contract was too valuable to sacrifice for his pride, and Marcus had made it clear that the consulting arrangement was non-negotiable. "Fine," Derek said finally. "But when this project runs into problems because of confused authority structures, don't say I didn't warn you." He left the conference room without another word, slamming the door behind him. Marcus and I sat in uncomfortable silence for a few moments before he spoke. "Jessica, I apologize for that confrontation. Derek is struggling to accept that his decision had consequences he didn't anticipate." Marcus, Derek's reaction tells me everything I need to know about whether he's learned anything from this experience. He's still more concerned about his authority than about the company's success or client relationships. Marcus nodded sadly. "You're right, and that's why the accountability measures we're implementing are so important. Derek needs to earn back the trust and respect of his colleagues, and that will take time and better decision-making." 6 months later, Phoenix Manufacturing's Phase 1 implementation was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. The efficiency improvements exceeded everyone's projections, generating cost savings that fully funded Phase 2 development. Sarah Chen and her team were so satisfied with the results that they approved an additional $10 million in expanded functionality. Derek remained at Meridian, but in a significantly reduced role. The accountability measures Marcus implemented had prevented him from making the kind of destructive decisions that had nearly cost the company its largest client. He was slowly learning to be a more collaborative and thoughtful leader, though the process was clearly frustrating for him. As for me, the consulting arrangement had evolved into something much more significant than anyone had anticipated. Phoenix Manufacturing's success had attracted attention from other potential clients, and I found myself managing multiple large-scale implementations for companies that specifically requested my involvement. The irony was perfect. Derek's impulsive decision to fire me had inadvertently created the best career opportunity of my life. His text message termination had freed me from the constraints of traditional employment, while positioning me as an indispensable consultant on Meridian's most important project. Sometimes the worst professional setbacks become the foundation for the greatest professional successes. Derek Thornfield taught me that lesson, though I'm quite certain it wasn't what he intended when he sent that text message from his corner office. The Phoenix Manufacturing deal proved that good work, strong relationships, and professional integrity always win in the end, even when you're fired via text message by the CEO's son on the biggest day of your career. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.